I never thought a simple skirt could bring back so many memories, or change my life forever. It all started when I found it tucked away in my closet. I tried it on, thinking it would be nothing more than a trip down memory lane. But when Jason, my nephew, showed up unexpectedly, everything spiraled into something I could never have imagined. What happened next still haunts me to this day. I had always been a simple woman, someone who found joy in the little things in life. For years, my days were filled with the routine comfort of work, family gatherings, and the occasional quiet evening spent reflecting on the past. My nephew Jason was a constant in my life. He was more than just family. He was like the son I never had. From his carefree laughter as a child to the mature, confident man he had become, Jason had always been someone I could count on. But lately, I had felt an unshakable emptiness. My once vibrant self seemed dulled by the weight of time and responsibility. It had been years since I let myself indulge in the joys that once made me feel alive. One day, while rummaging through my old closet, I stumbled upon a skirt from my youth. It was a piece I hadn't seen in years, a relic of a time when I felt free and full of life. Curious, I tried it on, laughing at the tight fit and the memories it brought back. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of the woman I used to be. It was silly, really, just a piece of fabric, but it awakened something in me. Little did I know, this small act would be the catalyst for events that would change everything. Jason arrived shortly after, offering his usual easy smile as he carried a bag of tools to fix the leaky faucet I had called him about earlier. Standing at the doorway, I couldn't help but notice how much he had grown. He wasn't the boy I used to babysit. He was a man now, with an air of confidence that made him almost unrecognizable. We chatted as he worked, the air filled with light banter. But beneath the surface, I felt a strange uneasiness I couldn't quite place. Jason's words struck a chord when he mentioned I seemed different, less cheerful, less like myself. His casual observation cut deeper than I expected. As he left that day, his words lingered, echoing in my mind. What had happened to me? And why did I feel so unsettled in his presence? The days that followed Jason's visit felt like a haze. His words about my changed demeanor stuck with me, nagging at the back of my mind. I had tried to brush it off, convincing myself that he was simply being thoughtful. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore, a strange tension I hadn't felt before. I found myself avoiding the skirt I had rediscovered, as if its mere presence reminded me of something I wasn't ready to confront. Jason began dropping by more often than usual. He always had a reason, a repair job, delivering something from my sister, or just checking in. At first, I thought nothing of it. Jason was family after all. But soon, his timing started to feel too perfect, his visits too frequent. There was a shift in his demeanor. His casual, confident charm felt more pointed, more intentional. One afternoon, he came by to return a dish my sister had borrowed. As he handed it to me, his fingers brushed mine, lingering just a second too long. It was such a small thing, but it sent a chill up my spine. I laughed nervously, pulling my hand back quickly, but I couldn't shake the strange flutter in my chest. Later that evening, as I sat in my quiet living room, I replayed the interaction in my mind. I told myself I was overthinking things. Jason was family. There was no reason to feel uneasy around him. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The next time Jason came over, it was to help me move some heavy boxes from the garage. As we worked side by side, he started sharing more about his life, his frustrations, his dreams, his fears. His voice was softer, more vulnerable, and his eyes held a depth I hadn't noticed before. It was disarming, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in a long time. But then there was a moment that stopped me cold. As we stood in the garage, taking a break, Jason looked at me with an intensity that felt almost invasive. "Auntie," he said, his voice low and steady, "I've always admired you. You're the kind of person I aspire to be." His words were innocent enough, but the way he said them made my heart race. It was as if there was something unspoken beneath the surface, something I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I tried to brush it off, smiling politely and changing the subject, but the uneasiness stayed with me long after he left. Over the next few days, I started noticing other things, small, seemingly inconsequential details that now felt significant. Jason's text messages became more frequent, and his tone was more personal, more intimate. When he came over, he lingered longer than he needed to, finding excuses to stay and talk. I began to dread his visits, not because I didn't care for him, but because I didn't trust the way I felt when he was around. One night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moments we'd shared, analyzing every word, every glance. Was I imagining things? Was this all in my head? Or was there something real, something unspoken, that neither of us was willing to admit? The more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they consumed me. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name. And deep down, I knew that if I wasn't careful, everything I thought I knew about myself, and my relationship with Jason, could come crashing down. Jason's visits became a regular occurrence, and with each one, the dynamic between us grew more complicated. It wasn't just the frequency of his visits that unsettled me. It was the way he looked at me, the way his presence lingered even after he was gone. I could feel the tension building between us, like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. One afternoon, he came by to fix the lock on my front door. It was a simple task, but Jason approached it with an unusual intensity, as if he was looking for an excuse to stay longer. As he worked, we chatted, our conversation flowing naturally. But then there were pauses, moments when the air between us grew heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. At one point, I leaned over to hand him a screwdriver. Our hands brushed, and instead of pulling away, Jason's fingers lingered just a moment too long. My breath hitched, and I quickly withdrew, pretending not to notice. But my heart was pounding, and I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks. Jason glanced at me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held something I couldn't ignore, a depth, a yearning that made my stomach twist. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me. It wasn't just admiration, it was something deeper, something that made me question everything. I told myself it was wrong to feel this way, that Jason was my nephew and nothing more. But the boundaries that had always felt so clear were now blurred, and I didn't know how to navigate this new, unsettling territory. The next time Jason visited, the tension between us was palpable. He had come over to help me rearrange some furniture, and as we worked, I could feel his gaze on me, lingering just a second too long. When I looked up, our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. My chest tightened, and I quickly turned back to the task at hand, but the moment stayed with me. As we finished moving the last piece of furniture, Jason sat down on the couch, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Auntie," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" I hesitated, unsure of what was coming. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Do you ever feel trapped? Like there's more to life, but you don't know how to reach it?" His question caught me off guard. I searched his face, trying to understand what he meant. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But that's just part of life, isn't it? We all have dreams we can't quite grasp." Jason leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "But what if those dreams aren't just dreams? What if they're feelings you're too afraid to act on?" His words hung in the air, heavy and charged. My heart raced as I realized what he was implying. I stood up quickly, needing to put some distance between us. "Jason, I think you should go," I said, my voice trembling. He stood too, his expression conflicted. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I don't know how to stop feeling this way." I didn't respond, unable to find the right words. He left without another word, and as the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of relief and regret. I knew I had done the right thing by asking him to leave, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Over the next few days, Jason and I avoided each other. He stopped coming by, and I tried to focus on my own life, throwing myself into work and hobbies. But no matter how busy I kept myself, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His words, his gaze, his touch, they haunted me, invading my thoughts when I least expected it. Then one evening, as I was washing dishes, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Jason. "I'm sorry for everything. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to fix this. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding. I knew I shouldn't reply, that responding would only make things more complicated. But before I could stop myself, I typed, "Okay. Come over tomorrow." The next day, Jason arrived, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. As we sat down to talk, I could feel the weight of everything unspoken between us. The conversation was tense, filled with half-finished sentences and lingering glances. And then, in a moment of vulnerability, Jason reached for my hand. "Auntie," he said, his voice trembling, "I don't want to feel this way, but I can't help it. You mean so much to me, and I don't know how to stop." His confession left me reeling, my emotions a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and something I didn't want to name. I pulled my hand away, standing up abruptly. "Jason, this has to stop," I said firmly. It's not right and it's not fair to either of us. He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, he said quietly. I'll try. As he left, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I knew this wasn't the end, but I also knew that something had to change before it was too late. Days turned into weeks, and I thought the storm had passed. Jason hadn't come over since our last conversation, and I convinced myself that the distance would help us both. I buried myself in work, trying to rebuild the sense of normalcy that had been so thoroughly disrupted. But the uneasy quiet was shattered one evening when I found a note slipped under my door. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Jason's. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the words that would change everything. I know you told me to stop, but I can't ignore how I feel. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know how much you mean to me. If you want me to leave you alone, say the word, and I'll respect your wishes. But if there's even the smallest chance you feel the same, let me know. My breath caught in my throat. Anger, confusion, and an ache I couldn't identify swirled inside me. I crumpled the note and shoved it into a drawer, hoping to bury it along with the turmoil it had unearthed. But Jason wasn't done. That night, my phone buzzed with a message. Did you get my note? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Finally, I typed yes. Jason, this has to stop. It's not healthy. His reply was immediate. I just need to know. Do you feel anything for me? I didn't know how to answer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but every word I thought to write felt wrong. Finally, I typed, Jason, you're my nephew. That's all I can say. The next morning, I threw myself into work, desperate to push the situation from my mind. But as I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, I felt an odd sensation, like someone was watching me. I glanced out the window and froze. Jason was standing outside, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. I rushed to the door, flinging it open. Jason, what are you doing here? I demanded. I needed to see you, he said, his voice calm but insistent. You didn't really answer my question last night. Jason, I told you, this has to stop. We can't keep doing this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But you didn't reject me completely, he countered, his gaze unwavering. I just want to know, do I have the slightest chance? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The confusion inside me was growing, threatening to consume me. Jason, this will only cause more pain for both of us, I said firmly. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I understand, he said softly. I just needed to hear it from you. As he turned to leave, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I thought that would be the end of it. But later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but urgent. Is this Jason's aunt? He's been in an accident. My heart dropped. What happened? Is he okay? I asked, my voice shaking. He's been taken to the hospital. You should come right away, the voice said. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. My mind raced with worry, guilt, and 1,000 unanswered questions. When I arrived, a nurse directed me to the intensive care unit. My heart pounded as I walked down the sterile corridor, each step heavier than the last. I found Jason lying in a hospital bed, his face pale but peaceful. A nurse explained that he had been in a car accident. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but he had suffered a concussion and needed to stay under observation. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of guilt so strong it nearly knocked me off my feet. As I stood by his bedside, Jason stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and when he saw me, a faint smile crossed his lips. Auntie, he whispered, his voice weak. I'm here, Jason, I said, my voice trembling. You're going to be okay. His gaze held mine for a moment, and I could see the pain and confusion in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. Tears welled up in my eyes. Jason, you need to rest, I said, brushing his hair back gently. We'll talk when you're stronger. For the next week, I visited Jason every day. He was quiet, subdued, as if the accident had forced him to confront something he hadn't been ready to face. One evening, as we sat together in the hospital room, he turned to me. Auntie, I've been so selfish, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I let my feelings cloud everything. I didn't want to lose you. His words broke something inside me. Jason, I said softly, we're family. Nothing will change that. But we need to find a way to move past this. For both our sakes. He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I understand, he said. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I promised. But we need to set boundaries. We need to heal. As I left the hospital that night, I felt a strange sense of closure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew we had taken the first step toward rebuilding the trust and connection we had lost. It would be a long journey, but for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Jason's recovery marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that was fraught with challenges and unspoken emotions. Although he was healing physically, the emotional scars of what had transpired between us lingered. For a while, we avoided discussing the situation altogether, instead focusing on small, superficial conversations. But the distance between us was undeniable. The first few weeks after Jason was discharged from the hospital were the hardest. He moved back into his own routine, but I could sense the tension every time we spoke. His messages became brief and infrequent, and our once easy conversations now felt heavy with unspoken words. I couldn't shake the guilt that weighed on me, nor the fear that our relationship might never return to what it once was. One afternoon, my sister, Jason's mother, called me. Her voice was filled with concern. "Jason seems different," she said. "He's quieter, more distant. Is everything okay between you two?" I assured her that everything was fine, but her words struck a chord. Jason's behavior had changed, and I couldn't help but wonder how much of it was my fault. Had I done enough to set boundaries? Had I handled the situation the right way? These questions haunted me, keeping me awake at night. Meanwhile, my own life felt increasingly out of balance. I threw myself into work, hoping to find solace in the familiarity of my responsibilities. But even there, Jason's presence lingered in my thoughts. I couldn't escape the memories, the way he had looked at me, the vulnerability in his voice when he confessed his feelings, and the pain in his eyes when I told him it had to stop. One evening, as I was sorting through some old belongings, I came across the skirt that had started it all. I held it in my hands, the fabric soft and worn, and felt a wave of conflicting emotions. This small, insignificant piece of clothing had somehow become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. I considered throwing it away, but something stopped me. Instead, I folded it neatly and placed it back in the closet, as if tucking it away might also bury the emotions it represented. Jason and I finally had the conversation we had been avoiding. It was a quiet evening, and he came over unexpectedly. We sat on the porch, the cool breeze carrying the weight of our unspoken words. He was the first to break the silence. "Auntie," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "I want to apologize again. For everything. I let my feelings get out of control, and I know I hurt you." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Jason, this has been hard for both of us. But you need to know that none of this changes how much I care about you. You're family, and I'll always be here for you. But we have to move forward, in a way that's healthy for both of us." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I know. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I said firmly. "But we need to rebuild trust. And that starts with boundaries." For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I understand," he said. "I want to make things right." From that moment on, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkwardness, times when old feelings threatened to resurface. But we were both committed to moving forward, to finding a way to heal the wounds we had caused each other. In the months that followed, Jason threw himself into his work and hobbies, channeling his energy into productive outlets. I focused on my own growth, exploring new interests and reconnecting with friends I had drifted away from. Gradually, the tension between us began to ease. Our conversations became lighter, more natural, and the trust that had been broken started to mend. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't forget the lessons I had learned. Love, no matter how strong, can sometimes be destructive. Boundaries are essential, even in the closest of relationships. And healing takes time, more time than I had ever imagined. One day, as I was tidying up, I found another note from Jason. This time, it wasn't a confession or a plea. It was a simple thank you. "Thank you for not giving up on me," it read. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm grateful for your patience and love. I'm working on becoming the person you deserve to have in your life." I held the note close, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. Jason had grown, and so had I. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught us both the value of resilience, forgiveness, and self-awareness. Life didn't return to the way it was before, too much had changed. But in time we found a new normal. Our bond was different, perhaps even stronger because it had been tested and survived. And while the memories of those turbulent months would always linger, they served as a reminder of how far we had come. The passage of time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of pain. Months turned into a year, and the chaos that once defined my relationship with Jason slowly faded into a memory. We had both worked hard to rebuild our connection, though it was now rooted in a deeper understanding of each other and the boundaries we needed to maintain. Jason, for his part, had grown immensely. He focused on his career, finding new challenges that excited him and gave him purpose. He also started seeing a therapist, something he confided in me with a mix of vulnerability and pride. "It's helping," he told me one day. "I'm learning to make sense of my emotions and understand why I felt the way I did." Hearing those words filled me with a quiet sense of relief. I had worried for so long about whether Jason could move past the feelings that had once caused so much turmoil. Seeing him take responsibility for his growth made me believe that healing was truly possible. For both of us. As for me, I had learned to let go of the guilt that had weighed me down for so long. I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could learn from it. The experience had forced me to confront parts of myself I had ignored for years. The emptiness I felt, the longing for something more. I began to fill those voids in healthier ways, rediscovering the things that brought me joy and fulfillment. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jason stopped by unannounced. It was the first time in months that his visit felt completely natural, free of the tension that had once defined our interactions. He joined me on the porch, and for a while, we sat in comfortable silence, the quiet hum of the evening wrapping around us like a blanket. "Auntie," he said suddenly, breaking the stillness, "I want you to know how much I appreciate you. For being patient with me, for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I smiled, my heart swelling with affection for the young man he had become. "Jason," I said, "life is complicated and we all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and grow. And I'm proud of you for doing just that." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. It was messy and painful, but it taught me a lot about myself. And about love. I realize now that love isn't just about how you feel. It's about respect, boundaries, and knowing when to let go." His words resonated deeply with me. "You're right," I said softly. "And sometimes the hardest lesson is understanding that love can't always be acted on. That some lines aren't meant to be crossed." We sat together until the sky turned dark, the weight of the past finally giving way to a sense of peace. As Jason left that evening, I felt a quiet certainty that we had both turned a corner. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but we were stronger, wiser, and better equipped to face whatever came our way. Looking back, I realized that the experience, as painful as it was, taught me some of life's most important lessons. I learned the value of self-awareness, the necessity of setting boundaries, and the power of forgiveness, not just for others but for myself. I also learned that love, in all its forms, is complex and sometimes difficult to navigate, but it's also what makes us human. As I closed the door that night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The journey we had been on was far from ideal, but it had shaped us in ways we couldn't have imagined. And for that, I was grateful. If you were in her position, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the boundaries of love, trust, and relationships. And stay tuned for our next story. You won't believe how one woman's secret almost destroyed her family. Click the bell icon to never miss an update.